You know that feeling when you're standing at the pinnacle of your achievement, the moment you've worked your entire life for, and you look out to see the people who matter most, only to find empty seats staring back at you. That's exactly where I found myself 3 years ago, wearing my doctoral graduation cap and gown, scanning the reserved section I'd so carefully arranged for my family. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this isn't just a story about empty chairs. It's about finding your own worth when the people who should celebrate you the most can't see past their own limitations. My name is Sarah, and I'm 31 now, but this story really begins when I was just a little girl growing up in a small town in Ohio. Picture this: a cramped two-bedroom house with faded yellow siding, where dreams were considered luxuries we couldn't afford. My mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the local diner, always coming home with the smell of grease in her hair and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She was a woman who'd given up her own dreams so young that she'd forgotten she ever had them, and somehow watching me chase mine felt like a personal affront to the choices she'd made. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at our wobbly kitchen table with my homework spread out before me when she'd walk by and shake her head. "Always with your nose in a book, Sarah. Life's not in those pages, you know. Life's out here, in the real world." But for me, those books were windows into possibilities, into worlds where little girls from nowhere could become something extraordinary. I'd read about women who became doctors, scientists, leaders, and I'd imagined myself among them, white coat draped over my shoulders, making a difference in people's lives. My stepfather, Robert, entered our lives when I was 10. He was a mechanic, a man who believed that honest work meant getting your hands dirty, and that anyone who spent too much time thinking was probably trying to avoid real work. He'd married my mother after a whirlwind 6-month courtship, and suddenly our little family of two became 3, then 4, when my half-sister Emma was born a year later. Robert wasn't cruel, not in the obvious ways. He just had this talent for making you feel small without ever raising his voice. "College girl," he'd call me, but the way he said it, you'd think it was an insult. "You planning to cure cancer with all that studying?" And then he'd laugh, that harsh bark that made my stomach tighten. Emma was different, or at least she started out that way. When she was little, she'd sneak into my room while I was studying, curl up on my bed, and ask me to explain what I was learning. "Tell me about the body again, Sarah," she'd whisper, and I'd explain how the heart pumped blood, how the lungs brought in oxygen, how everything worked together like a beautiful symphony. Her eyes would light up with wonder, and for those moments I felt like maybe someone in my family understood why this mattered to me. But families have a way of molding their members, don't they? As Emma grew older, she began parroting our mother's words. By the time she was in middle school, she'd roll her eyes when I talked about my pre-med courses. "Why can't you just be normal?" she'd ask, and each time it felt like another small betrayal, another person choosing the comfort of low expectations over the discomfort of supporting someone reaching higher. Then there was Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who lived just 2 towns over. Patricia was what my mother could have been with different choices. She'd married well, lived in a beautiful colonial house, and spent her days at the country club. But success hadn't made her kinder, it had made her condescending. She'd visit for Sunday dinners dripping in jewellery and survey our modest home with barely concealed disdain. "Linda," she'd say to my mother, "you must be so proud of Sarah, trying so hard in school." But the emphasis on trying made it clear she didn't expect me to succeed. The extended family wasn't much better. There were the cousins who'd settled into comfortable mediocrity and seemed personally offended by anyone who wanted more. There was Uncle Dennis, who'd inherited a small plumbing business and never let anyone forget he was a job creator. There was Grandma Rose, who lived in Florida and sent birthday cards with $5 bills and messages about how education was nice, but a good husband was better. High school was where the divide really began to show. While my classmates were planning parties and dating, I was studying for AP exams, volunteering at the hospital, building the resume that would get me into a good pre-med program. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, was the first person to really believe in me. "You have something special, Sarah," she'd say during our meetings. Don't let anyone dim that light. But at home, that light felt more like a burden. Every A on my report card was met with suspicious silence. Every award, every recognition was treated like I was showing off, like I was trying to make them feel bad about their own choices. I'll never forget the night I got my acceptance letter to Northwestern University, full scholarship for their pre-med program. I'd worked for this moment for 4 years, sacrificed everything for it. I ran into the house, letter clutched in my trembling hands, tears of joy streaming down my face. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. "Mom," I said breathless, "I got in, full scholarship, Northwestern." She turned from the stove slowly, looked at the letter in my hand and said, "That's in Chicago, isn't it? Awfully far from home." That was it. No congratulations, no pride, just a reminder that I was leaving, that I was choosing something over them. Robert didn't even look up from the TV. Emma, then 13, said, "Does this mean you think you're better than us now?" And in that moment, something inside me crystallized. I realized that I would have to choose between their approval and my dreams, and the choice, painful as it was clear. College was like stepping into another world. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who understood ambition, who celebrated achievement, who pushed each other to be better. My roommate, Jennifer, became my first real friend who understood why I studied until 3 in the morning, why I volunteered for extra lab hours, why missing a lecture felt like a personal failure. "Girl," she'd say, bringing me coffee during late-night study sessions, "you're going to be an amazing doctor someday." And for the first time, someone saying that didn't feel like a jinx or a joke, but the distance from home came with guilt. Every phone call with my mother was an exercise in emotional navigation. She'd update me on town gossip, tell me about Emma's latest drama at school, complain about Robert's back problems, and then, almost as an afterthought, ask how I was doing. When I'd try to share my excitement about a research project or a professor who'd taken me under their wing, I could practically hear her attention drifting away. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, in that tone that meant she was already thinking about something else. The holidays were the worst. I'd come home, exhausted from finals, hoping for a warm welcome, only to be met with subtle accusations. "Must be nice to be too good for us now," Aunt Patricia would say at Christmas dinner. "All that fancy education, bet you can't even remember how to wash dishes anymore." I'd laugh it off, help with every chore, try to prove that success hadn't changed who I was at my core. But it had, hadn't it? Not in the way they thought. I hadn't become arrogant or dismissive. I'd simply grown beyond the box they'd built for me, and they couldn't forgive me for it. Medical school acceptance came during my senior year of college. This time, I didn't run home with the news. I called my mother, keeping my voice steady, and told her matter-of-factly, "Oh," she said, "more school then?" As if 8 more years of education was a prison sentence rather than a dream coming true. When I mentioned it was at Johns Hopkins, one of the best medical schools in the country, she asked if that meant I'd need to borrow money. The scholarship I'd earned, the prestige of the program, the incredibly competitive acceptance rate, none of it registered. All she heard was that I was choosing to stay away longer. The white coat ceremony during my first year should have been a moment of family pride. I sent invitations 2 months in advance, offered to pay for hotels, even researched restaurants near campus for a celebratory dinner. The responses came in slowly, each more creative in its excuse than the last. Robert had a big job at the shop that week. Emma had cheerleading tryouts. Aunt Patricia was planning a cruise. And my mother, well, she simply said that Baltimore was too far and she didn't like cities. I stood there in my pristine white coat, surrounded by classmates whose families had flown in from across the globe, and felt the peculiar loneliness that comes from being unsupported by those who should support you most. Medical school was brutal in ways I hadn't imagined. The workload was crushing, the pressure constant, the imposter syndrome real. There were nights I'd cry in the library bathroom, wondering if they were right, if I was trying too hard, reaching too high. But then I'd remember Mrs. Henderson's words about not dimming my light, and I'd splash cold water on my face and get back to work. My study group became my surrogate family. Marcus, David, Priya, and I would spend 18-hour days together, surviving on coffee and determination, pushing each other through the hardest moments. It was Marcus who noticed that I never talked about home. We were in our third year doing clinical rotations, and he asked me point blank one exhausted evening, "Why don't your folks ever visit?" I made excuses at first. They were busy, it was expensive, they didn't like to travel. But Marcus had this way of seeing through carefully constructed walls. "My family doesn't really understand what I'm doing either," he said gently, "but they show up anyway. That's what family does." The simple truth of it hit me like a physical blow. He was right. Family shows up, even when they don't understand, especially when they don't understand. Mine just didn't. The fourth year of medical school is when you apply for residencies, and I threw myself into the process with single-minded determination. I wanted competitive programs, the ones that would push me to be the best physician possible. When I matched with a prestigious residency program at Massachusetts General, I was over the moon. This was it, proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. I called home with the news, my voice shaking with excitement. "That's nice, honey," my mother said. "Will you be making money finally?" When I explained that residents do get paid but not much, she sighed. "All that education and you're still broke. I don't understand it, Sarah." But it was the graduation that broke something in me. 8 years of undergraduate and medical school, and I was finally going to be Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Not just in title, but in truth. I'd made it through the gauntlet, survived the pressure that broke so many others, and I was graduating near the top of my class. More than that, I'd been chosen to give one of the student speeches at the ceremony. This wasn't just my achievement. It was a moment that deserved to be witnessed by the people who'd watched me dream about it since I was 7 years old. So I did something I'd never done before. I decided to remove every possible obstacle to their attendance. I'd saved money throughout medical school, living on ramen and hope, tutoring undergraduates in organic chemistry, working every shift I could at the Student Health Center. I had about $15,000 saved, earmarked for moving expenses and setting up my life as a resident. Instead, I spent $12,000 of it on my family. First-class airline tickets for my mother and Robert from Ohio to Baltimore, a luxury suite at the Four Seasons with a view of the inner harbor, a private car service to ferry them from the airport to the hotel to the ceremony venue, dinner reservations at the most elegant restaurant in the city. I even arranged for a professional photographer to capture the moment when I walked across that stage. For Emma, who was now in college herself, I booked a separate flight that would work with her finals schedule, and a spa day for her and my mother the morning of graduation. For Aunt Patricia, I arranged everything around her social calendar, even checking with Uncle Dennis to make sure there were no conflicts with his golf tournaments. I sent personalized invitations on thick, cream-colored cardstock, each one hand-addressed. Inside a bousie, I'd written personal notes. To my mother, "You've worked so hard your whole life. Let me treat you to a weekend where you're celebrated too." To Emma, "I know we've grown apart, but you'll always be my little sister. I'd love to share this moment with you." To Aunt Patricia, "Your presence would make this day complete." The RSVPs came back positive. Everyone was coming. My mother even called, sounding genuinely excited for the first time in years. "I've never flown first class," she admitted, a girlish quality in her voice I hadn't heard in decades. Patricia is jealous. For a brief, shining moment, I thought maybe this would be our turning point. Maybe seeing me walk across that stage, hearing me give that speech, understanding the magnitude of what I'd accomplished, maybe that would finally bridge the gap between us. I threw myself into preparations. The speech went through dozens of drafts as I tried to strike the perfect balance between professional and personal. I wanted to thank my professors and mentors, but I also wanted to acknowledge that sometimes the greatest motivation comes from those who doubt you. I had my graduation gown pressed 3 times to make sure it was perfect. I got my hair professionally styled, choosing an elegant updo that my mother had always said would look lovely on me. The week before graduation, I called to confirm everyone's flights and check if they needed anything else. The calls went unanswered. text messages delivered but weren't read. By Thursday, with the ceremony on Saturday, a cold dread began settling in my stomach, but I pushed it away. They were probably busy packing, I told myself, getting ready for their trip. Friday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the ceremony, my phone finally buzzed with messages. They came in rapid succession, like a series of small explosions. First, from my mother. Sarah, we've decided not to come. Your Aunt Patricia found a deal on a Caribbean cruise, and we've all decided to go as a family instead. You understand? These medical things are so long and boring anyway. Have fun pretending to be important. Then from Emma, sorry sis, but Mum's right. We'd rather be somewhere actually enjoyable. It's just a graduation. From Aunt Patricia, honestly, Sarah, expecting us all to drop everything for your little ceremony is a bit much. The cruise was non-refundable. You understand, being so smart and all. From Uncle Dennis, kid, this is what happens when you think you're better than everyone. Enjoy your fancy doctor party. I stood in my apartment, still in my scrubs from a 30-hour shift, reading these messages over and over. The casual cruelty of them, the coordination it must have taken to plan this group betrayal, the fact that they'd waited until the last possible moment to tell me. It was breathtaking in its deliberateness. They hadn't just decided not to come, they'd decided to hurt me in the process, to make sure I knew exactly how little my achievement meant to them. That night, I sat in my empty apartment, looking at the schedule I'd so carefully crafted for their visit. Breakfast at the charming cafe near campus where I'd spent so many mornings studying. A tour of the hospital where I'd done my rotations, where I'd saved my first life, where I'd held hands with the dying. The photo spots I'd scouted for family pictures. The speech I'd written that included a paragraph about how even when family doesn't understand your dreams, their love sustains you through the journey. I deleted that paragraph. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect May days that Baltimore sometimes gifts you. I put on my cap and gown alone, fixed my own hair, applied my makeup with steady hands despite the tremor in my chest. My classmates were buzzing with excitement, their families already claiming seats in the auditorium. I watched them with a detached sort of interest, these people surrounded by love and support, wondering what that must feel like. The 12 seats I'd reserved were in the VIP section, front and centre, with perfect sightlines to the podium. It had small cards made with each person's name in gold lettering. Dr. Mitchell had made sure her family would have the best seats in the house. As the auditorium filled, those 12 seats remained empty, a glaring void in a sea of proud faces. People started to notice, whispering, wondering who was important enough to have VIP seats but didn't show up. When it was time for my speech, I walked to the podium on steady legs, my heels clicking against the floor in the sudden silence. I looked out at the sea of faces, classmates, professors, strangers, and for just a moment, my eyes lingered on those empty chairs. Then I began to speak. Not the speech I'd originally written, full of gratitude for support I'd never received, but a new one, about resilience, about finding your own way when the path is dark, about how sometimes the absence of support teaches you to build your own foundation, about how the greatest gift my family had unknowingly given me was the knowledge that I could survive without their approval. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People were wiping tears. My mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, caught my eye from the faculty section and nodded with such fierce pride that I almost broke down right there. But I held it together through the rest of the ceremony, through the conferring of degrees, through the hat toss and the cheers. I was Dr. Sarah Mitchell now, and I'd earned it without them. The celebration dinner I'd booked for my family became a quiet meal with Marcus and a few other close friends who'd noticed my solitude. They didn't ask about the empty seats, didn't push for explanations. They simply surrounded me with the kind of warmth I'd been craving all day. Marcus raised his glass at one point and said, "To Dr. Mitchell, who proves that you can choose your family." And maybe that was the moment the healing began. But the story doesn't end there, not really. Because that night, alone in my hotel room, the same luxury suite I'd booked for my mother, I made two decisions that would change everything. First, I went through the photos the professional photographer had taken. There was one that captured everything perfectly, me at the podium, giving my speech, with those 12 empty chairs visible in the foreground. The contrast was artistic in its starkness. One woman standing tall while absence shouted from the premium seats. I had the photo printed in high-resolution 60x20, suitable for framing. Then I had 11 copies made, one for each family member who'd chosen a cruise over my culmination. I packaged each one carefully, adding a single line at the bottom: "Your reserved seat at my medical school graduation, May 15th, 2021. No accusation, no anger, just a simple statement of fact. They'd had a place of honor waiting for them, and they'd left it empty. The second don't let buts, the package, seeing that photo, all those empty chairs, I didn't realize, we joked about it being boring, but I didn't think, please call me back, please. I didn't call back. Instead, I started my residency, throwing myself into the brutal 100-hour weeks with something approaching relief. At least here, the exhaustion had a purpose. At least here, when I pushed myself to the breaking point, it was in service of something that mattered. My fellow residents became my tribe, especially Marcus, who'd matched at the same hospital. We survived on terrible cafeteria coffee and gallows humor, holding each other up through the hardest days. The family drama escalated over the summer. Apparently, the photos had caused quite a stir. Emma posted on social media about her dramatic sister who couldn't let things go. Aunt Patricia told anyone who would listen that I'd become insufferable since getting my degree, but there were cracks in their united front. My cousin Jessica, Patricia's daughter, reached out privately to say she thought what they'd done was horrible. My father, absent for most of my life, sent a congratulations card with a note: "I heard what happened. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you." But the real shock came in September. My mother showed up at the hospital. I was just finishing a 36-hour shift, dead on my feet, when I saw her in the lobby. She looked older, greyer, smaller somehow. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was tentative in a way I'd never heard. "Please, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." I could have walked away. Part of me wanted to, but something, curiosity maybe, or the doctor in me that couldn't turn away from someone in pain, made me gesture to a nearby bench. She sat carefully, clutching her purse like a shield. "I've been carrying that photo in my wallet," she said without preamble. "Looking at it every day, those empty chairs. God, Sarah, what did we do to you?" "You showed me who you are," I said simply, "and more importantly, you showed me who I am without you." She flinched but didn't argue. "I was scared," she admitted. "Every time you achieved something, it felt like you were leaving us further behind, like you were proving that our lives weren't enough, that we weren't enough." "That was never what it was about," I said, suddenly exhausted by this old argument. "I wasn't trying to be better than you. I was trying to be the best version of myself." "I know that now," she said. "Patricia told us about the cruise, made it sound like such a deal, and it was easier to go along. Easier than facing how much we'd failed you." She pulled out an envelope, handed it to me with shaking hands. "This isn't enough. Nothing could be, but I wanted you to know." Inside was a check for $12,000, the exact amount I'd spent on the graduation arrangements. I stared at it, this attempt to balance a cosmic ledger that could never be balanced. "I don't want your money," I said, handing it back. "Then what do you want?" she asked, and for the first time in my life she sounded genuinely interested in the answer. "I wanted you to show up," I said. "That's all I've ever wanted. For you to show up even when you didn't understand, especially when you didn't understand. But you couldn't do that, and now it's too late." She started crying then, not dramatic tears, but quiet ones that seemed to come from somewhere deep. "Can't we start over?" she asked. "Can't I try to do better?" I thought about it, really thought about it. The daughter in me wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that people could change, that family could be repaired. But the doctor in me, the one who'd learned to make hard decisions based on evidence rather than hope, knew better. "We can't start over," I said gently, "but maybe we can start from here, from the truth." From accepting that you broke something that can't be unbroken and deciding what to do with the pieces. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I'll take that, she said. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. We parted awkwardly, no hugs, no promises, just a tentative agreement to perhaps exchange Christmas cards. I watched her walk away, this woman who'd given me life but couldn't give me understanding, and felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the grip the past had on me. The inheritance from my grandmother became the seed money for something beautiful. Along with 2 other residents who shared my vision, we began planning a clinic for the underserved communities in Boston. Not just a place for medical care, but a center that would offer education, support groups, preventive care, all the things that people like my mother, working 2 jobs and barely surviving, never had access to. We named it the Grace Mitchell Center after my grandmother, and slowly, piece by piece, we built it during the precious few hours we weren't at the hospital. 3 years passed in a blur of 18-hour days, difficult diagnoses, small victories, and devastating losses. I became the doctor I'd dreamed of being, the kind who sat with patients and really listened, who fought insurance companies for necessary treatments, who never forgot that healing was about more than just medicine. The clinic grew from a dream to blueprints to reality. We opened our doors on a rainy Tuesday in November, and 50 people showed up on the first day. My family kept their distance mostly. Christmas cards were exchanged. Emma graduated from college and sent me an announcement. I sent a congratulations card and a small gift. Aunt Patricia got diagnosed with breast cancer, and despite everything, I helped her navigate the medical system, finding her the best oncologist, translating the terrifying terminology into something manageable. She thanked me stiffly, unable to fully bridge the gap between us, but acknowledging, finally, that my education had value. Then came another graduation. This time, my celebration for completing my residency and accepting a position as an attending physician at the hospital. I didn't send invitations this time. I'd learned that lesson, but I did send an announcement to the family group chat, more out of courtesy than expectation. The responses were polite, distant. Congratulations. Good job. Best wishes. I was okay with that. What I wasn't prepared for was my mother showing up at the clinic on a Wednesday afternoon. Not the hospital, the clinic. She stood in the waiting room, looking at the photos on the walls, the mission statement we'd crafted, the bustling energy of a place that existed to help people like her. I've been reading about this place, she said when she saw me. In the local paper, they say you don't turn anyone away. We don't, I confirmed, wary of where this was going. I remember being pregnant with you, she said suddenly, 23 years old, terrified, no insurance. I sat in an emergency room for 8 hours with contractions because that was the only place that had to see me. I promised myself you'd have better, and look what you built. Her voice broke. You gave other people what I couldn't give you. It wasn't an apology for the graduation, for the years of dismissal, for choosing a cruise over my achievement. But it was something. An acknowledgement that what I'd built mattered, that my dreams hadn't been foolish or selfish but necessary. Everyone deserves quality healthcare, I said simply. Everyone deserves to be seen. She nodded, then pulled out her worn wallet. Inside, I could see the edge of the graduation photo I'd sent, creased from folding, but still there. I tell people my daughter did this, she said quietly. I know I don't have the right, but I do. I tell them my daughter is a doctor who doesn't forget where she came from. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that she took pride in me remembering where I came from when she'd spent years trying to keep me there. But I didn't point it out. Growth, I'd learned, came in small steps, not giant leaps. Thank you for coming, I said, and meant it. That evening, as I locked up the clinic, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The little girl reading medical textbooks by flashlight. The teenager hiding acceptance letters from judgmental eyes. The medical student standing in front of empty chairs, delivering a speech about resilience to strangers, because the people who should have been there chose to be elsewhere. Each version of me had built the foundation for this moment, where I stood as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, not in spite of my family's absence, but perhaps because of it. The empty chairs at my graduation had taught me something valuable, that sometimes the space people leave in your life becomes the room you need to grow into who you're meant to be. My family's absence had forced me to find my own cheerleaders, build my own support system, create my own definitions of success and worth. The clinic was full of chosen family now, colleagues who'd become friends, patients who'd become advocates, a community that saw the value in what we were building together. A year later, the clinic celebrated its first anniversary. We'd served over 3,000 patients, started 4 support groups, partnered with local schools for health education, and secured funding for the next 5 years. The Boston Globe did a feature story on us, complete with a photo of the founding doctors standing in front of the building. I sent a copy to my family, not seeking approval anymore, just sharing a piece of my life the way you might share a sunset photo. Here's something beautiful that exists in the world. The responses were different this time, warmer. Emma called for the first time in 2 years. "I'm thinking about medical school," she said hesitantly. "I know we haven't been close, but I was wondering if maybe we could talk about it." I said yes, of course. You don't punish someone for growing even if their growth comes late. We talked for 2 hours about prerequisites and MCAT prep and the brutal beauty of medical training. At the end, she said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Sarah. At your graduation, I'm sorry for a lot of things." "We all make choices," I said. "The important thing is what we choose next." Aunt Patricia sent a donation to the clinic with a note. "For the work you're doing, Mother would have been proud." It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged that I might be worthy of my grandmother's legacy. Uncle Dennis's daughter brought her newborn in for care when they lost insurance, and he had to swallow his pride and thank me for not turning them away. Robert sent a message through my mother that he'd been wrong about book learning not mattering in the real world. Small acknowledgements, tiny bridges built over the chasm they'd created. But perhaps the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. One of my patients, an elderly woman named Miriam, who reminded me achingly of my grandmother, asked me one day why I seemed so sad when I talked about family. I found myself telling her the whole story, the graduation, the empty chairs, the slow journey towards something resembling peace. She listened with the patience of someone who'd lived long enough to see all varieties of human failure and redemption. "You know what I think?" she said when I finished. "I think those empty chairs were a gift, not a kind one, not one you'd ever ask for, but a gift nonetheless. Because they forced you to fill your life with people who choose you, not people who are obligated to you. And look what you've built with that freedom." She was right, in a way. The family I'd assembled, Marcus and his husband who hosted me for holidays, my colleague Priya, who'd become my closest confidant, the nurses who'd adopted me during residency, the community of patients and advocates who believed in our mission. They showed up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Their support wasn't tinged with resentment or weighted with guilt. It was freely given, joyfully received. As I write this now, at 31, successful in ways my 7-year-old self could barely imagine, I think about families and the stories we tell ourselves about them, how we're taught that blood is everything, that family should be our first and fiercest supporters, that their approval is the ultimate validation. But sometimes family is the lesson in what not to be, the motivation that comes from absence rather than presence. The empty space that teaches you how to fill your life with chosen love instead of obligatory connection. My mother and I have found a tentative peace. She comes to the clinic sometimes, volunteers at our food pantry, tells anyone who'll listen about her daughter, the doctor. It's not the relationship I once dreamed of, but it's real and honest in a way our previous interactions never were. Emma is in her first year of medical school now, calling me weekly with questions and fears and excitement. I gave her my old study guides, my notes, my hard-won wisdom about surviving the brutal beauty of medical training. She says she won't miss my graduation. I believe she means it. The others drift in and out like distant planets in irregular orbits. Aunt Patricia sends holiday cards with updates about her grandchildren. Uncle Dennis fixed the clinic's plumbing for free last winter, his version of an apology. Robert and my mother are still together, still bewildered by my choices, but no longer actively hostile to them. The extended family watches from social media, liking photos of the clinic's achievements, maintaining a safe distance from actual involvement. And those empty chairs. The photo still sits in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as a testament to survival. Sometimes, when young medical students come to me, exhausted and doubting themselves, feeling unsupported by families who don't understand their drive, I show them that photo. Look, I tell them, this is my medical school graduation, 12 empty VIP seats, and I'm still here. You will be too. Because that's the truth I've learned, you can't make people show up for you. You can't earn their understanding through achievement or buy their presence with first-class tickets. You can only choose how to fill the empty spaces they leave behind. And if you're very lucky, if you're very persistent, if you're willing to do the work, those spaces can become gardens where chosen families grow, where community flourishes, where the life you build is so full that the absences become footnotes rather than defining chapters. The Grace Mitchell Centre serves over 10,000 patients now. We've expanded to 2 locations, started a residency rotation program, begun training the next generation of physicians who understand that medicine is about more than just healing bodies. It's about healing communities, bridging gaps, showing up for people who are used to being overlooked. Every day, I walk into a building born from my grandmother's belief in me and my own refusal to let empty chairs define my worth. And I know that this is what success really looks like. It's not about proving anyone wrong or right. It's not about vindication or revenge. It's about taking the raw materials of your life, including the disappointments, especially the disappointments, and building something meaningful from them. My family gave me absence, and I transformed it into presence for others. They gave me doubt, and I turned it into determination. They gave me empty chairs, and I filled them with people who actually wanted to be there. So here's to the women who know what it's like to achieve alone, who've stood at podiums looking out at empty seats, who've celebrated milestones with chosen families instead of biological ones. Here's to understanding that sometimes the greatest gift people can give you is showing you exactly who they are, so you can stop waiting for them to be who you need. Here's to building lives so full, so purposeful, so surrounded by genuine support that the empty chairs become just another part of the story. Not the ending, but the beginning of something better. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I spent $12,000 to learn that you can't buy what was never for sale. But in losing what I thought I needed, I found what I actually deserved. A life built on my own terms, a career that matters, and a family chosen with intention rather than assigned by accident. And those empty chairs? They're filled now, not with the people I once begged to show up, but with the ones who never needed an invitation. But let me take you deeper into this story, because understanding where you end up requires understanding all the moments that shaped the journey. There's so much I haven't told you yet about those years, about the small betrayals and unexpected kindnesses, about the nights I almost gave up, and the mornings I found strength I didn't know I possessed. I remember one particular Christmas during my undergraduate years that encapsulated everything about my family dynamics. I'd just finished my first semester at Northwestern, had made the dean's list, and was floating on the kind of academic high that comes from proving you belong somewhere competitive. I'd taken the Greyhound bus home because flights were too expensive, arrived at the house I'd grown up in with a duffel bag, and hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be different. The house smelled like my mother's pot roast and pine from the artificial tree Robert insisted on because real ones were too much hassle. Emma, then in high school, barely looked up from her phone when I walked in. My mother hugged me briefly, then immediately asked if I'd gained weight. "All that studying, you're probably living on pizza," she said, though I'd actually lost weight from the stress and long hours in the library. Dinner was the usual interrogation disguised as conversation. Robert wanted to know if I was still wasting time with all those books and suggested I could make good money over break working at his friend's warehouse. When I explained I needed to study for next semester and work on research applications, he snorted. Research? That's what people do when they can't get real jobs. The breaking point came when Aunt Patricia arrived with her family. She swept in wearing a new fur coat, immediately dominating the room with stories about their recent vacation to Aspen. When attention finally turned to me, she asked, with that perfectly calibrated condescension she'd mastered, "So, Sarah, still pretending you're going to be a doctor?" "I'm not pretending," I said quietly. "I'm pre-med at Northwestern. I have a 4.0 GPA. "Well," she said, examining her manicured nails, "we all know grades don't mean much in the real world. My Jennifer is getting her business degree and already has job offers. Practical, you know?" Jennifer, my cousin, smirked from across the room. She'd gone to the local state school, which was perfectly fine, but somehow my choice to aim higher was seen as a personal insult to everyone who hadn't. The rest of the evening devolved into subtle and not so subtle digs. Stories about people who'd wasted money on education only to end up in debt. Comments about how I thought I was too good for normal careers. Jokes about how they'd have to start calling me doctor in a mocking tone. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion from the bus ride, and locked myself in my childhood bedroom. The walls were still painted the pale lavender I'd chosen at 13, still covered with pictures of the life I was trying to leave behind. I sat on my twin bed, textbooks spread around me, and cried silently so they wouldn't hear. Not from sadness exactly, but from the profound loneliness of being surrounded by people who were supposed to love you, but seemed to resent everything you were becoming. That night solidified something in me. I stopped going home for breaks after that, finding excuses to stay on campus, picking up extra shifts at the lab, volunteering at the hospital over holidays. "My family is complicated," she told me once, after I'd confessed why I was spending another Christmas in the lab. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is create distance and find your people elsewhere." My people started revealing themselves in unexpected ways. There was Jennifer, my roommate, whose Korean immigrant parents understood sacrifice for education in ways my family never could. They'd send care packages with both of our names on them, filled with homemade kimchi and notes telling us we were making them proud. There was David from my study group, a first-generation college student like me, who understood the weight of being the one who was supposed to make it. We'd stay up until dawn before exams, not just studying, but talking about the guilt of leaving people behind, the fear that success meant betrayal. During my junior year, when I was applying for medical school, the contrast became even starker. I needed committee letters, had to prepare for interviews, was drowning in application fees despite my scholarships. When I mentioned to my mother that each application cost over $100, she laughed. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around," she said, as if I hadn't been working 3 jobs to afford it. Meanwhile, my chosen family rallied. Jennifer's parents drove 5 hours to take me shopping for an interview suit, insisting it was an investment in my future. My biochemistry professor, Dr. Williams, spent hours with me doing mock interviews, refusing to let me settle for generic answers. "You have a story," she said. "Don't be afraid to tell it." The pre-med advisor helped me apply for fee waivers, found alumni willing to let me stay with them during interview trips, essentially becoming the support system my biological family refused to be. The day I got into Johns Hopkins was surreal. I was working my shift at the campus coffee shop when the email came through. My hands shook so badly I dropped an entire tray of drinks. My manager, who'd been listening to me stress about applications for months, took one look at my face and said, Go celebrate." I ran across campus to find Jennifer, who screamed so loudly when I told her that people came out of the library to see what was wrong. We cried and hugged and jumped around like children, and then she called her parents, who insisted on taking us out to dinner to celebrate. That evening, I finally called home. My mother listened to the news in silence, then said, "I suppose you'll be too important to visit now." When I tried to explain what an accomplishment this was, what Johns Hopkins meant in the medical world, she cut me off. I have to go, Sarah. Jeopardy's on. Click. Medical school brought its own challenges. The workload was crushing, the imposter syndrome real. During anatomy lab, standing over our cadaver, I'd sometimes feel like a fraud. These other students had doctor parents, had grown up speaking the language of medicine. I was still translating, still catching up, still proving I belonged. But my lab partners, especially Marcus, wouldn't let me sink into that spiral. You earned this, he'd remind me when I doubt myself. No one accidentally gets into Hopkins. The financial strain was constant. While other students worried about grades, I worried about rent and whether I could afford to eat more than ramen that week. My family, meanwhile, seemed to think I was living some glamorous life. Emma posted on social media about her rich doctor sister when I was literally checking couch cushions for quarters. The disconnect was so profound it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. But there were moments of grace, like the attending physician who noticed I was wearing the same scrubs every day and quietly arranged for me to receive a scholarship that covered new ones. Like the cafeteria worker who'd slip extra food onto my tray and wink. Like the study group that rotated bringing meals so everyone ate, knowing some of us couldn't afford to contribute equally. These small kindnesses kept me going when the isolation from my family felt overwhelming. The white coat ceremony I mentioned earlier, that was when I finally stopped hoping they'd change. Standing there, receiving my coat from Dr. Chen, who'd become more of a mother figure than my actual mother, I realized I was looking for them in the audience out of habit, not desire. The emptiness where they should have been had become familiar, almost comfortable. My chosen family was there. Jennifer had driven down from New York, where she was working as a researcher. Marcus's parents had adopted me as honorary family and insisted on taking photos. Dr. Martinez from undergrad sent flowers. These people showed up because they wanted to celebrate me, not because they felt obligated. Third year brought clinical rotations, and with them a new understanding of what kind of doctor I wanted to be. During my pediatrics rotation, I worked with kids from backgrounds like mine, poor families, overwhelmed parents, children who were bright but overlooked. One patient, a 12-year-old girl named Lucia, reminded me so much of myself it hurt. She'd been hospitalized for complications from untreated asthma, but what struck me was how she clutched a biology textbook the entire time. "You like science?" I asked during one of my checks. Her eyes lit up. "I want to be a doctor," she whispered, then immediately looked at her mother as if expecting disapproval. Her mother sighed. "She has big dreams, too big maybe." I spent extra time with that family, told Lucia about programs for students interested in medicine, about scholarships, about how I'd grown up in a house not unlike theirs. Her mother watched me with something like recognition. Before they left, she pulled me aside. "Nobody ever told me it was possible," she said, "for kids like ours. Thank you for showing her it is." That interaction planted the seed for what would become the clinic. I started volunteering at free clinics in Baltimore, seeing how many people fell through the cracks of our healthcare system. People like my mother, who worked multiple jobs but couldn't afford insurance. People like Robert, whose tough-it-out mentality meant he ignored symptoms until they became emergencies. I began to envision a place that would serve these communities with dignity and respect. Fourth year arrived with the stress of residency applications. This time, I didn't even tell my family I was applying. What was the point? But my chosen family was there every step. Marcus and I spent countless hours reviewing each other's applications. Jennifer flew down to help me practice for interviews. My mentors wrote letters that made me cry with their kindness and belief in me. When match day came, and I discovered I'd matched at Mass General, one of the most competitive programs in the country, the celebration with my found family was everything I'd once imagined having with my biological one. Which brings us back to graduation and those 12 empty chairs. But there's more to that story too. The morning of graduation, as I was getting ready alone in my apartment, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Marcus's mother holding a garment bag. A mother should help her daughter get ready for such a big day, she said simply, and I broke down completely. She stayed with me, fixed my hair, straightened my hood, told me stories about Marcus as a child to make me laugh through the tears. When it was time to go, she hugged me and whispered, "We're so proud of you, Mija, so very proud." The speech I gave, the rewritten one, the one born from absence rather than presence, resonated in ways I hadn't expected. Afterwards, so many people approached me with their own stories of achieving despite, not because of family support. A fellow graduate whose parents had disowned him for choosing medicine over the family business. A professor who'd been the first in her family to attend college and faced similar resentment. We formed an informal support group, meeting monthly even after we scattered to our residencies, checking in on each other during the brutal first years. Residency was its own kind of trial by fire. The 100-hour weeks, the life and death decisions, the constant weight of responsibility. There were nights I'd sit in my car after a particularly hard shift, too tired to drive home, and wonder if my family had been right. Maybe I had reached too high. Maybe this was too hard. But then I'd remember Lucia clutching her biology textbook. I'd remember the patient who'd survived, because I'd caught something others missed. I'd remember why I'd started this journey in the first place. The clinic project became my lifeline during those years. Whenever residency threatened to break me, I'd work on business plans, grant applications, community outreach. Marcus joined the project, then Priya from our residency program, then Dr. Kim, an attending who'd grown up in circumstances similar to mine. We met in coffee shops at ungodly hours, planning something that felt impossible but necessary. My grandmother's inheritance made it possible, but it was the community that made it real. We found a building in a neighborhood that reminded me of where I'd grown up. Tired, but not defeated, overlooked, but not empty. The renovation took months. I spent my rare days off painting walls, installing fixtures, meeting with community leaders to understand what was needed most. The day we installed the sign, Grace Mitchell Community Health Center. I sat on the steps and cried, not from sadness, but from the profound realization that I'd built something my family couldn't take away. Opening day was chaos in the best way. We'd planned for maybe 20 patients. 50 showed up. By noon, we had a line around the block. These were my people, the working poor, the uninsured, the ones who'd been told to wait in emergency rooms for 8 hours, like my mother once had. We stayed open until midnight that first day, seeing everyone who came. When we finally locked the doors, my team and I sat on the floor of the waiting room, exhausted but exhilarated. "We did it," Priya said. "We actually did it." The clinic grew faster than we'd anticipated. Within 6 months, we'd added evening hours to accommodate people who couldn't miss work. We started a sliding-scale pharmacy program. We partnered with social workers to address the non-medical factors affecting health. Every success felt like a vindication, not of my choices, but of the belief that healthcare could be different, could be accessible, could be kind. That's when the media attention started. First local news, then regional, then that Boston Globe feature. My face on the front page of the health section, standing in front of the clinic with my team. The headline read, "Young Doctors Build Bridge to Healthcare for Underserved Communities." I bought 20 copies, sent one to my childhood home without a note. Not to gloat, but to document. This happened. This mattered. The response from my family was complicated. My mother called after the article, her voice strange. "I saw you in the paper," she said. "The ladies at the diner were all talking about it." There was pride there, buried under layers of confusion and perhaps regret. "That's nice," I said, matching her neutral tone. We'd learned to speak in this careful way, circling around the deeper wounds. Emma's journey to medical school brought unexpected healing. She called more frequently as she navigated applications, and I found myself able to separate my anger at her past choices from my desire to help her succeed. When she got into Case Western, she called crying. "I understand now," she said. "Why you worked so hard, why it mattered so much. I'm sorry I made you feel small for dreaming big." It was the apology I'd needed years earlier, but late was better than never. I helped her prepare for medical school, sending care packages during her first semester, talking her through the imposter syndrome, the exhaustion, the moments of doubt. When she sent me a photo of herself in her white coat, I felt something shift. Maybe we couldn't repair the past, but we could build something new in the present. The clinic's first anniversary celebration was everything my graduation should have been. The community showed up in force. Patients whose lives we'd impacted, local business owners who'd supported us, medical students who volunteered with us, reporters documenting our model for potential replication. I gave another speech, this time to a room full of people who'd chosen to be there. No reserved seats necessary. They came early to ensure they wouldn't miss it. That night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty clinic with Marcus. We stopped in each room, remembering the patients we'd served, the lives we'd touched. "You know what's funny?" he said. "If your family had shown up for you, supported you, made it easy, would you have built this?" I thought about it for a long time. "No," I finally admitted. "I would have become a doctor, but maybe not this kind of doctor. Their absence taught me to see the overlooked, to show up for people who expect to be forgotten. Their rejection made me build something inclusive." "Then maybe those empty chairs were exactly where they needed to be," he said. It was a generous interpretation, one I wasn't quite ready to embrace fully. But I understood what he meant. Our wounds shape us as much as our victories. The clinic existed because I knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be told you're reaching too high, to need support and find absence instead. Year 2 brought new challenges and growth. We added mental health services, recognizing that healing bodies without addressing minds left too much undone. I hired Dr. Rebecca Chen, no relation to my mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a psychiatrist who'd grown up in foster care and understood the intersection of trauma and physical health. Together, we created support groups for everything from diabetes management to dealing with family estrangement. That last one was my pet project, a safe space for people whose ambitions had alienated them from their origins. The estrangement support group revealed how common my story was. Every week, we'd gather in a circle, doctors, teachers, artists, EAs, engineers, all of us carrying the weight of families who couldn't or wouldn't understand our choices. There was communion in that shared experience, healing in hearing others voice the guilt I'd carried silently. "I still send money home," one member shared, "even though they call me selfish for leaving." Another, "My brother told me my PhD made me too educated to be family anymore." We laughed at the absurdity and cried at the truth of it. My relationship with my mother evolved slowly, carefully. She started volunteering at the clinic's food pantry, initially suspicious and defensive, gradually softening as she saw the impact. One day, I overheard her talking to another volunteer. "My daughter built this place. She always wanted to help people, even as a kid. I didn't understand it then." It wasn't quite accurate. She'd actively discouraged my dreams, but I let her revise history if it helped her live with the present. Robert's first visit to the clinic came via medical necessity. He'd been ignoring chest pains for weeks, finally agreeing to come only when my mother threatened to leave him at home while she visited Emma. I wasn't his doctor. That would have been too complicated, but I made sure he received excellent care. When the tests revealed he needed cardiac catheterization, I watched my mother's face crumple. "All those years of him saying doctors were useless," she whispered, "and now they're saving his life." The procedure went well, and Robert's recovery brought unexpected conversations. Lying in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him, he said, "I was scared of you, you know, this little girl who read all the time, who knew things I didn't. It was easier to mock it than admit I was intimidated by a child." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an explanation, and sometimes that's all we get. Emma matched into her residency at a hospital in Cleveland, choosing emergency medicine. "I want to be the doctor who's there for people's worst moments," she explained. "Like you were there for mine, even when I didn't deserve it." We'd found our way to a real relationship, built on mutual respect and shared experience rather than obligatory family ties. When she called during her brutal first year, crying from exhaustion and doubt, I could offer support without bitterness. Growth, it turned out, was possible for all of us. The clinic's third year brought recognition I'd never imagined. We won a National Innovation Award, were featured in medical journals, had other communities reaching out to replicate our model. I was invited to speak at conferences, sharing our blueprint for community-centered care. At one conference in Chicago, I realized I was presenting at the same hotel where I'd once worked banquets during college to afford textbooks. The irony wasn't lost on me, from serving food to serving as keynote speaker. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from an unexpected source. Lucia, the 12-year-old who'd wanted to be a doctor, showed up at the clinic during her senior year of high school. She'd grown tall and confident, still carrying that determination I'd recognized years earlier. "I got into Johns Hopkins," she said, barely containing her excitement. "Pre-med. Full scholarship. I wrote about you in my essay, about how you showed me it was possible." I hugged her tightly, remembering another girl who'd dared to dream beyond her circumstances. "It was always possible," I told her. "You just needed to believe it." "My mum wants to thank you," she said, gesturing to the waiting room where her mother sat. "She's different now. Proud, different." That conversation with Lucia's mother was a mirror of what I'd always wanted with my own. She cried, thanking me for showing her daughter a path she hadn't known existed. "I was like your mother," she admitted, scared that her dreams meant leaving us behind. "But you showed me that success doesn't mean forgetting where you come from. It means making where you come from better." If only my own mother could have learned that lesson sooner, but we work with the reality we have, not the one we wish for. My mother and I had found our rhythm, careful but consistent, respectful if not close. She'd send recipes through Emma, I'd share clinic updates through carefully worded texts. We'd see each other at Emma's milestones, polite and pleasant, the sharp edges worn smooth by time. The day I was named one of Boston's 40 under 40 healthcare innovators, my phone buzzed with unexpected messages. Extended family who'd mocked my ambitions suddenly wanted to reconnect. High school classmates who'd thought I was too good for our town reached out with congratulations tinged with requests for medical advice. I responded politely to all, helped where I could, but maintained the boundaries that protected my peace. Aunt Patricia's journey was perhaps the most dramatic. Her breast cancer diagnosis had humbled her in ways success never could. During treatment, she experienced firsthand the difference between care given grudgingly and care given with compassion. "I understand now," she said during one of her appointments at Mass General, "why you do this, why it matters." She became one of the clinic's most generous donors, funding our mammogram program. "Consider it penance," she said, and for once there was no edge to her voice. The clinic expanded to a second location in year 4, this one in a rural area outside Boston, where medical care was even scarcer. The opening ceremony drew hundreds, including a surprise visitor, my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, now retired but still radiant. "I knew you'd do something special," she said, surveying the crowd, "but this exceeds even my expectations." Having her there, one of the few who'd believed from the beginning, felt like completing a circle. Building the second clinic brought new challenges. Funding, we weren't bringing anything they didn't already have, just providing tools and access to let their own strength flourish. My personal life, long neglected in the pursuit of professional goals, began demanding attention. But maybe